afternoon, Mr. Palmer. How are you, sir? Welcome back to
Doing
the
good,
RUCKCast.
John. How about you?
I'm great, fantastic, and as a matter of fact, it's a very good day on the RUCKCast. We have a
It
special
is.
guest.
We do have a special guest, but it also means
Yeah.
we can't be our normal self. We have to actually, like before when we had Middle on, it was like that was my boss and you didn't have to care. But now we have somebody who actually
We really have to behave today.
we do.
I'm the most likely to be misbehaving on this episode, I would
I
imagine.
And it's recorded, so now we have an out. All right.
So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that.
So Bart, all right. We're doing this all backwards today. So we are joined by Bart Giordano, who is the president of CommScope Nix. I think that's what it is now. Bart, am I right? I think that's what your title is.
Yeah. So CommScope's organized, as you know, across 5 business segments, one which we call networking, intelligence, cellular, and security. And I have the privilege of leading these 3 business units, one being Ruckus Networks, for which I'm also the general manager, but also in our intelligent cellular networks business and a new business we're incubating around IoT device security that we call CommScope Sentry.
And I actually had a call with those folks last week, I think, and I'm actually very excited to actually dig more into this because as I was able to talk with them, and we were kind of going through what that means and what that is, all of a sudden I was just like, all these ideas just sort of like pop. It was like, oh, wait. So
I know I have the same reaction. We actually have a very sophisticated, physically secure PKI infrastructure that we operate this business off of. And the first time I toured it, I got through the first 7 layers of security, and then they told me you can't go any further. You don't have right access for my own business.
But so we'll have to come back. That's a whole other topic. We talked security. We talked security last episode. So now we got to, as much as I'd love to talk it, we have to cut that out and we have to actually talk about a different topic today. So, John,
Do I need to
Mr.
go first?
Giordano,
Sure.
I've heard about this thing coming out, and I might have talked a little bit about it. We might have talked about it on the podcast here about a thing called Wi-Fi 7. I've heard some rumors, heard some things about it, and we decided that it would be kind of an interesting idea, an interesting episode to bring Bart on to talk about Wi-Fi 7, but from a different level. So John and we're Wi-Fi engineers. We have other titles, but at the heart of it, we just like building Wi-Fi networks. It's what we like. It's what we're good at. And so we look at things from that perspective. And so today, for the next 25 to 30 minutes, I want to talk to Bart about Wi-Fi 7 and get a little bit different perspective of what Wi-Fi 7 actually means, not only for Ruckus, but just for, the business across all the verticals and all the segments. So, putting on your president hat for a minute, what does Wi-Fi 7 actually mean for Ruckus and for the business of making networking gear?
Well, I think, across the industry, we recognize I've been doing Wi-Fi for 15, 20 years now. We all kind of measure our time in Wi-Fi by these standards, right? So I measure mine across the 11G to 11N transition, right? So that's how far back I go, almost to the beginning, but not quite. We follow these regular periodic technology upgrades, right? And I think, as consumers or as buyers in an enterprise, you probably don't have the appreciation for how long these things take to develop. Standards development in 802.11 for Wi-Fi 7 would have started many years ago. And there is a very technical and often political process behind developing these standards in terms of which features are in, which features are out, which features are optional, which features are mandatory. And there's governing bodies like 802.11 and like the Wi-Fi Alliance, where this consortium of industry experts and businesses come together to sort all of this out. Ultimately, leading to the new silicon that, creates the opportunity to introduce a new Wi-Fi specification, and then the products around it. Those products consisting of, not just the access point hardware itself, but a lot of sophisticated software on that device and a lot of sophisticated software either on premise or in the cloud to manage all of that. So these are very long, expensive endeavors for the industry, but it's big business, right? Wi-Fi is a massive $10 billion market, typically growing, the high single digits to 10% every year. And so it's an attractive market for a lot of players to participate in, and therefore it's hotly contested. Wi-Fi 7, I think it's going to bring a lot of unique value over the ensuing years. We're expecting the first sort of enterprise products to be introduced toward the end of this year. Obviously, consumer products with the big numbers on the box that we're accustomed to when you walk into a big box retailer and you're on Amazon, and everybody loves when the standard has a new maximum PHY rate, right? Because that's what goes on the box, and that's what they try to sell on. And those of us who know that that's an unattainable value, but it helps sell retail devices.
Ain't that the truth?
It always warms my heart when I hear somebody say that, that max PHY rate is just so unobtainable. It's just, I don't know. We all know it, but it always makes me feel good when
we're about to run out of room on the box with Wi-Fi 7.
Well, if we can get a fourth radio, then we can make a really big AP, and then you have to have a really big box to get more room to put more numbers. So maybe
I think it does help to provide some context around that. I think unlike prior technology transitions in the Wi-Fi sector, which all really were about higher speeds and feeds. I mean, that has been the guiding force, and certainly, there's a lot of unique value and unique features that have come in as we moved from ABGN when we introduced MIMO, and then subsequently as we moved to the new nomenclature, Wi-Fi 4, 5, 6, 6E, 7. But predominantly, it's been higher bandwidth and faster throughput, right? I mean, that's been the anchor. And Wi-Fi 6E to a certain extent, and certainly now to 7, represents a bit of an inflection point in that. I mean, certainly there's higher PHY rates with Wi-Fi 7. The math behind that is getting very, very complex from a signal processing perspective. Certainly there's higher bandwidth, right? We've got 59 new non-overlapping channels. You got 5 different bandwidths to choose from, these massive channels to use. But I think more importantly, perhaps, is the focus and interest and opportunity around latency and reliability, right? We're really bringing Wi-Fi into the realm of other wireless technologies like cellular, which beyond just speeds and feeds now can have more reliable and deterministic performance and latency, even in the presence of interference, right? There's a lot of features coming in to mitigate interference. There are features that are enabling you to transmit on multiple radios across multiple bands at the same time. And this is a bit of a watershed moment for the industry as you think about the applications that can potentially be enabled as the ecosystem gets built out. I think one of the other things that we have to acknowledge is, over the 20-year period of Wi-Fi, billions and billions of devices, 10 billion devices have been introduced into the market. And, prior to the introduction of the 6 gigahertz spectrum in 6E, in 2.4 and 5 gig, you have to maintain backward compatibility with all of those devices, going back to the early 90s, right? If they're still out there in operation. And that has sort of, I think, hindered the ability of the industry to take advantage in some cases of all the new things that come out in Wi-Fi. But now that we've introduced this greenfield spectrum, 6 gigahertz, and it's now being opened up from a regulatory perspective in all the major markets around the world, we can now enable, I think, a unique set of applications that previously you would have said, for this mission critical type of workflow that I have, I might not consider Wi-Fi as the way to enable that wirelessly.
No, I mean I think you just stole the rest of the episode, Jim. We should just kind of hang up and let Bart go.
I don't know. Jim's rolling his eyes, so he's got some contrarian opinion, probably.
But that's Jim. He has to. That's just Jim. But you raise a lot of good points, and I mean that's the reason why a lot of us are excited about what's coming with 6E and 7 at the same point in time. And I had this conversation with Jared, my boss, who talked about Wi-Fi 7 or 6E actually back at WLPC in Prague. I feel like we're going to have to relearn Wi-Fi. I think we're literally going to go back to the basics for a lot of us, which is kind of crazy, but cool at the same point in time. Shifting gears a little bit. So that was sort of why Bart, the president, is excited about Wi-Fi 7. Take the hat off as president. We're going to do a lot of wardrobe changes for an audio podcast. It's kind of funny. What for you is just an engineer, somebody with an engineering background, what part of Wi-Fi 7 excites you the most?
So I think the capacity that's enabled by Wi-Fi 7, and really, you kind of have to look at how these specs evolve. I think there's always been sort of a little bit of conflict in the market across 3GPP and 802.11, right? And cellular services versus Wi-Fi services, and when is 5G going to kill Wi-Fi, et cetera. And I think if you work and live around these industries, and now I have the privilege of managing both a very mature, successful cellular business and Ruckus Networks, right, with a broad history and lineage of innovating around Wi-Fi, and with that perspective, I think that you can acknowledge there is time and a place to use the right technology for the right application. And so the industry's begun to get a little bit smarter over the last couple of years. And these specifications have been borrowing the best elements of each spec and ratifying those into the quote unquote competitive spec. And so I think, what I'm most interested and excited about in Wi-Fi 7 is the fact that we're borrowing some really fantastic primitives from the cellular world in order to make Wi-Fi more reliable, right? Approaching that you can achieve with traditional licensed spectrum cellular networks. Now, the nature of unlicensed spectrum is, you always have to back off in the presence of interference, right? So you're never going to achieve parity from a reliability perspective, from a latency perspective, perhaps with cellular networks over a prolonged period or in the presence of interference. But we're taking elements of those RF principles and radio management principles and adopting them into the Wi-Fi 7 specification to mitigate a lot of the underlying factors that previously precluded that. The ability to, siphon off part of a channel that is being interfered with in order to avoid interference in the network. The ability to now transmit, across multiple radios across different spectrums concurrently is going to have a lot of benefits to latency for applications like VR and gaming, et cetera. And certainly, as we see VR and AR more broadly adopted in the enterprise, and you're enabling, workflows around factory automation, health and safety equipment, et cetera, really mission critical applications where, you previously may not have considered Wi-Fi because of the nature of unlicensed spectrum. I think now that there's going to be folks who push the envelope to see what these new specifications and capabilities really will yield in terms of new applications, performance, reliability, and predictable latency.
No, I'm definitely excited. I think the one thing I always go back to every standard, and this goes back to when I was taking my CWNA class years ago, they always show you the standards, BGN, whatever. And the comment's always the same. Like, there's a lot of good stuff in here. And they always have like one or two that they show you and they're like, this is really cool. And everybody's like, why aren't we doing that? They're like, well, vendor A didn't want to do it that way, and vendor B did it a little bit differently, and nobody could agree with it. So they just gave up. And I think
that's where the politics come into ratifying these specs, right? And you really only get the value and benefit from these new features when they become mandatory.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, right? With all the, the certification has to happen in order to be able to say you're Wi-Fi 7, and just really excited about that. Not being backwards compatible for a change. Sorry, it's great that Wi-Fi does support devices that were made 20 years ago, but it's good that there's going to be a part of the Wi-Fi world that requires it to be new, and it's not tied down or limited to the least capable device.
You get a clean sheet of paper with 6 gig.
It's really exciting.
Yeah.
I have to admit, your answer about you were most excited about the capacity issue and some of those other and talking about 3GBP really fascinated me, because that was not where I thought you were going to go with that. And I always enjoy these conversations that we have on the RUCKCast when I learn something. And as you were talking, you mentioned something, and all of a sudden it was just like it clicked. So I'm going to go off a little bit here on a tangent, but you were talking about some of these the similarities between the 3GPP, the cellular stuff, and Wi-Fi. And it brought me back to a conversation I was having with somebody else in the industry when Wi-Fi 6, 802.11ax was first coming out. And they were talking about OFDMA. And as they were talking, I realized that the OFDMA technology, it was actually lifted almost, from LTE. That is an LTE type of thing. And so as soon as I realized that, I was like, oh, I'm fine. I was like, because they've been doing this for a long time. So we have this experience. But as you were talking, I started to realize, I was like, now I've done some Wi-Fi presentations and we've talked about Wi-Fi 7. And but it never really dawned on me that, you talk about building upon the next generation, and OFDMA is really at the heart of what allows us to do some of the cool things with Wi-Fi 7. And so I think that's really cool. So thank you for, sort of, talking through that. And I was able to be like, I can make that connection. And so thank you for that. But, but it also, it really is that capacity thing. And and the fact that, there's these 4 major things that we're talking about with Wi-Fi 7, and you keyed on capacity, which isn't even one of those things that we really talk about. I found fascinating.
Well, I think the reason is, as you go out into the market over the last couple of years, we've seen a big shift in the approach to designing enterprise Wi-Fi networks, right? I mean, for years, the philosophy was, I need to design for coverage, right? I need to make sure every corner of my office building has sufficient coverage, because my employees are going to come in and they want to be in the corner conference room, with their laptop and be able to, be productive and effective regardless of where they are in my facility. But we're not just showing up to work with a laptop anymore, right? Or we're not just showing up to a higher ed campus with, a notebook computer and a phone and an iPad. You talk to CIOs in higher learning institutions, and I kind of poll them every year or so and ask them, what is the average number of devices per student? And it's gone from 3 to then, the introduction of wearables and gaming consoles and connected TVs, right? And so, the proliferation of devices per person has exploded in the enterprise, whether you're talking about an office space such as the one I'm sitting in here, or a higher learning institution, or a hotel. And so it's no longer sufficient to just consider coverage, right? What is my signal to noise ratio in this corner of my classroom? And so there's been a shift now in the thinking for network designers in how do I design for capacity. Now, this is Ruckus' specialty, right? I mean, I think Ruckus stands out as somewhat unique in the enterprise Wi-Fi industry as not having been born out of solving connectivity issues predominantly in the carpeted enterprise, where you tend to have fairly symmetrical space, a fairly predictable RF environment, an IT organization controlling the devices that come in, and perhaps some expectation on the sophistication of users. On the other hand, Ruckus really started out serving public access networks, guest-facing networks in municipalities, right, out on city streets, in large public venues, in hotels, in learning environments, where you can't expect anything about the sophistication of your users. You can't make any determination around peak capacity or when it's going to hit you, right? You just might have 500, 600, 1,000 people walk off a train in a transportation hub, right, after the network's sitting idle all day. And you can't predict what devices are going to be brought onto the network, right? You'll see every Wi-Fi device ever conceived of onboarding to your network, and it just needs to work. And it needs to work with carrier grade reliability under any conditions. And so designing for capacity and solving for connectivity problems that arise even under the most difficult and dynamic environments is kind of was the original kind of fundamental value proposition for Ruckus. So we love this shift in the market toward a capacity-based mindset, right? Because that's what we built the entire business around over the last 20 years. And I think that the specs sort of now catching up and contemplating the fact that we're going to need networks with more capacity, new spectrum, higher channel bandwidths, more channels, along with, some of the other underlying really complex technologies that have been around for a long time, like OFDMA, but have recently applied to Wi-Fi, will allow us to continue serving networks that require even greater capacity under really difficult environmental conditions and, non-deterministic use cases.
It's funny, as you were talking, I thought about it. You were talking about, Ruckus and where we specialize in, what we're really good at. And it's like, and it's really reflected in in the name. Ruckus, we specialize when there's a ruckus, when there's
ruckus, you bet.
when things are crazy, when things are, there's that uproar, when there's a ruckus happening, and that's really where we can. So I just had to laugh. I was like, it really goes to the heart of why that name is, and quite frankly, why I love the name. That's just a personal thing, but
the brand works very well.
It does. It all fits together.
So getting back to the meat and the potatoes of this, right? So we've had engineer Bart, we've had President Bart. Let's say Bart gets stuck in an elevator with some CIO or CTO. You've got 30 seconds before she or he is off the elevator. What's your elevator pitch about why they really need to upgrade to this Wi-Fi 7?
So, the important thing when just talking to a decision maker, a technical decision maker, is first and foremost to understand the problems they face, right? I think it's really easy to come and spew all the value we just talked through around specs and performance, et cetera. But at the end of the day, a buyer today can figure all that stuff out from your website, right? So by the time you're in the elevator pitch with some technical decision maker, at that level, there should be an assumption that they kind of already understand the benefits of the underlying technology that we've talked through. And what they really want to know is how your solution is going to solve their problem better than others. And, approaching that from a Ruckus perspective, we're very specific about what areas of the market we serve, right? Where we know there are specific challenges faced by the buyers there that we feel we solve better than others. And understanding the challenges faced by a property owner for multifamily apartment complexes, or the CIO of a higher ed institution, or large elements of the U.S. federal government, given the sensitive nature of a lot of the networks we serve there, is really critical. And then we design and implement our solutions specifically targeting those challenges, right? And try to speak to the specific buyers in those industries. So if you're going to approach somebody about a Wi-Fi 7 network upgrade, you're going to want to understand what are the areas of their environment that they're struggling with today. Do you have capacity issues? Do you have issues around latency and reliability? Are you implementing automation in your factory or distribution center where you have challenges around interference, or you have challenges around coverage and mobility? And from there, when you have the understanding of their business challenges, you can propose the right technology. And I think there are some emerging use cases in those types of environments that will benefit tremendously from Wi-Fi 7 over the ensuing years.
That makes sense. I think the one thing, and being in the field, and Jim and I both being former customers, we're used to the refresh cycle. And I think the one thing it's a unique point in time in Wi-Fi in general, because pre-pandemic, it was like I was literally looking at like a 3 to 5 year Wi-Fi refresh. And depending on the building, depending on the use case, was probably closer to 3. And if it was maybe not as important to the company, it was probably closer to 5. And I know there are plenty of places that upgraded during the pandemic, but there are plenty of places that didn't, with 6E still waiting with AFC, knowing that 7 was kind of coming and 7 was going to have everything with 6E and then some. A lot of people waited. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much interest there is and how much uptake there is in the next 6, 12, 18 months.
Certain industries that, in our experience, tend to adopt bleeding edge solutions. They tend to be those that are less price sensitive, right? I'll give you an example. U.S. primary education, right? On one hand, you might assume that that's a pretty price sensitive market, right? We're talking about publicly funded schools. On the other hand, there's a funding mechanism in the U.S. through the federal government called E-rate, right? And 50 to 80%, depending on the financial situation in your school district, of their connectivity upgrade can be funded through this program. So they tend to be less price sensitive than others. And I think one of the challenges we have to acknowledge with Wi-Fi 7 and 6E to a certain extent, these are more expensive solutions on within a given product family, right? Than Wi-Fi 6. And it's a couple of different reasons for that. One is the silicon itself and the components that go into these products are more expensive. But we now have 3 radios rather than 2, right? And so those industries that that traditionally adopt bleeding edge technology and are less price sensitive, I think are going to be more predisposed to moving earlier. In more price sensitive industries, where they tend to buy across technology generations within the same pricing band, right? It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. But our belief is that Wi-Fi 6 is going to persist much, much longer in the market than, for example, Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 4, when it was like, everybody just moved on that 3 to 5 year cycle that you mentioned. And I think we're going to see Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 persisting a lot longer together, with the bulk of the volume over the next couple of years continuing to be Wi-Fi 6 as the Wi-Fi 7 technology matures and we really understand what the capabilities and benefits are in terms of the problems that it solves.
This is why I love listening to you, because you always end up bringing up perspectives and points and things that I hadn't really thought of. Because when you said the K through 12 education, as somebody who was like bleeding, I was just like, he's got to be so wrong on this one. I was like, there is no way. But then you put your reason out there, and I'm like, well, I'm like, well, crap,
if you go look at where we saw most of the 6E adoption in our business, that's K through 12 education, right? Yes. And the E-rate cycle is 5 years, right? So once your 5 years is up, you're eligible for new funding, and you're going to buy whatever the latest and greatest solution is, because it's got to get you through the next 5 years, right? Yeah. And so, I painted a broad brush across an industry segment in one country in the world, but nevertheless, right, it's a big market, and just given the nature of how it's funded and the cyclical nature, we definitely see, them oftentimes adopting the brand new high-end, highest spec technology.
Yeah,
and we should, for the kids, right? So.
Yeah, well, yeah. And like I said, but it's like I said, I always learn so much when I listen to you talk, and I listen to some of your other interviews and everything, and I always end up learning something, which I very appreciate. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on.
For us to learn from each other. You bet. Happy to do that.
And I got to be respectful of your times, because you are an important guy. So last couple of minutes here. Well, actually, you can take as much time as you want, because you are the boss. If there's one last thing that you could impress upon people that are listening to this episode about, Ruckus and Wi-Fi 7, what would that one thing that you would want to impress upon our listeners about the past 30 minutes that we've been talking?
Well, we call it purpose-driven networking. And behind that is, something we touched on earlier. It is a deep understanding of the business challenges that are faced in the industries that we serve. And from the way we conceive of how we design our products to the way we go to market, with salespeople, marketing people, partners that specialize in those industries, we are incredibly purposeful around how we go and attack challenges in the most difficult environments that we can find, right? I believe that's where we really stand out. And we oftentimes challenge prospects, and we challenge our customers, identify the most difficult area of your network, where you have the most complaints, the most dissatisfied users, and let us go solve that problem for you, right? We want to rise to that occasion, because that's where I think we bring the most value. And certainly today, the portfolio has expanded considerably from the days when I joined 8 years ago. I'm coming up on my 8-year anniversary with Ruckus, when we were Ruckus Wireless, and we had really fantastic Wi-Fi solutions along with network management. Today we've got the ICX switching portfolio, which emanated from the old days of Foundry Networks. So fantastic lineage in that portfolio. We've organically developed our IoT solution, which is solving a whole new host of operational technology issues that are cropping up in the enterprise. We've been investing very heavily in AI and machine learning and data science over the last several years, and that is reflected in our Ruckus Analytics product, and is even now being applied to radio resource management in order to optimize and automate the way you can optimize a network for eliminating co-channel interference. And so it is a very broad-based portfolio that is coming together in a unified way that is solving the most difficult challenges in these industries. And so that's where I think we deliver the most value to our customers, and why the business is being so successful today.
Well, that's why I'm here. That and the public.
That's why I'm here.
All right.
It's one of those, I don't know. We've definitely got an underdog mentality, and I think, I don't know, who doesn't love puppet,
I relish it. I always want to fight from the underdog position, right?
Nothing wrong with that. Everybody loves an underdog, right? So I don't know that I have anything left to ask. I don't think Jim does either. And I know, like you said, We could sit here for hours and hours, but the reality is Bart does run the business, and
so
he's an important gentleman, and we appreciate.
I'm honored to have been asked to come on, and I'm happy to do it anytime.
Anytime you want to come on, if you've just you walking into the office in Sunnyvale and you're like, you know what, I just feel like talking to Jim and John. Just let us know. We'll make time.
Yeah.
We have a guest. We'll kick them off. I don't. But in all seriousness, no, we do appreciate the time. It's I love hearing your enthusiasm for what's coming down the pike. We know Wi-Fi 6E was the big thing. The 6 gigahertz was really the big thing with 6E, but 7 is really where it's at, and that's really where we're going to see, I think, start to see a lot of interesting, the adoption of the technology, the use of the technology. You hit on AI, VR, AR, everything coming together. There's so many different things. It's just an exciting time to be a Wi-Fi nerd, which is why we're really happy. And the enthusiasm from the big dog himself is just, it's awesome. So yes. I have no other questions. So I just want to say thank you for your time, and I appreciate it. And I know I'll see you in a couple weeks at a customer site, but I look forward to the next time we get to have you on.
Appreciate both of you. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you,
sir.
Talk soon.